The First Crusade began in 1096, when Pope Urban II made a theological revolution. He promised automatic entry to heaven for anyone who died trying to take Jerusalem. Think about that spiritual bombshell for a second. For centuries, the Church taught that killing was a mortal sin requiring years of penance. Now suddenly, killing became the penance itself. Urban called it a pilgrimage, but pilgrims don't usually bring swords. Within months, 100,000 people were marching east, many sewn crosses on their clothes, believing they were literally doing God's work. The religious fervor created something terrifying. Peter the Hermit, a charismatic preacher, led the People's Crusade in 1096, claiming Christ appeared to him demanding Jerusalem's liberation. His followers saw visions, performed miracles, and massacred Jewish communities in the Rhineland, believing they were killing Christ's killers. The official church was horrified, but couldn't control what they'd unleashed. At Antioch, Crusaders spent 8 months besieging the city while starving themselves. A mystic named Peter Bartholomew claimed St. Andrew revealed the location of the Holy Lance that pierced Christ's side. They dug where he pointed and found a spear. Modern historians think it was planted, but the Crusaders believed, and their faith turned them into fanatics. When they finally took Antioch, and this is where divine mission meets human depravity, at Mara, Crusaders turned to eating the bodies of their enemies. Contemporary accounts describe soldiers boiling adult pagans in cooking pots. Yeah, you heard that right. They justified cannibalism as consuming the enemies of God. They shouldn't have won. The Crusaders were outnumbered, thousands of miles from home, basically the distance from New York to Baghdad, dying of disease. But here's the religious twist. They interpreted every victory as divine intervention, and every setback as God testing their faith. Muslim forces were too busy with their own religious divisions, Sunni Seljuks versus Shia Fatimids, to mount unified resistance. On July 15, 1099, Jerusalem fell. The Crusaders believed they were instruments of biblical prophecy. They slaughtered everyone they found, Muslims, Jews, and even Eastern Christians who practiced different liturgies. The Jewish population barricaded themselves in their synagogue, so the Crusaders burned it down while singing "Christ, we adore thee." Muslim sources report blood running knee-deep in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Crusaders saw this as cleansing the holy city. 40,000 dead in 3 days, more than medieval London's entire population, all in God's name. The First Crusade succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, which medieval Christians interpreted as proof of divine favor. They established 4 new states with religious names: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, where Christ walked; the County of Edessa, where Christianity first flourished; the Principality of Antioch, where followers were first called Christians; and the County of Tripoli. But wait, this religious victory would actually curse every crusade that followed, because now any failure meant God had withdrawn his blessing. These crusader states created a theological problem. How do you run Christian kingdoms surrounded by Muslims? They developed religious apartheid, Latin Christians on top, Eastern Christians tolerated, everyone else subjugated. When Edessa fell to Zanghi in 1144, Bernard of Clairvaux, basically the Billy Graham of the 12th century, preached it as divine punishment for Christian sins. The Second Crusade would be Europe's chance at redemption. Surely God would forgive them this time, right? Wrong. King Louis VII of France and Emperor Conrad III took the cross after Bernard promised that God would grant victory to the penitent. Over 200,000 soldiers marched east in 1147, many wearing crosses and carrying relics. Bernard's sermons claimed Jews were protected by God for future conversion, preventing more massacres, but his militant Christianity still drove the largest military expedition Europe had ever seen. Everything went wrong from the start, which chroniclers struggled to explain theologically. Conrad's army was destroyed crossing Anatolia, despite carrying a piece of the true cross. The survivors made a catastrophic decision, and get this, they attacked Damascus, one of the few Muslim cities allied with Christians. Imagine if during World War II, American Christians attacked British Christians instead of fighting actual enemies. The siege failed miserably. How could God let his warriors fail? Medieval theologians twisted themselves in knots explaining the Second Crusade's failure. Some blamed secret sins, others insufficient faith. Still others claimed God was testing Christianity. A new generation of Muslim leaders emerged, including Saladin, who understood Christian psychology. Ever heard of him? He was about to give Christianity its greatest theological crisis. Fast forward to 1187. Saladin had united Egypt and Syria using jihad rhetoric that mirrored Christian holy war. At the Horns of Hattin, he destroyed Jerusalem's army in a single day. He captured the true cross, Christianity's most sacred relic in the East, and paraded it upside down through Damascus. Within months, Jerusalem surrendered. But here's what sermons don't mention. Unlike the Crusaders in 1099, Saladin, following Islamic law, allowed Christians to leave peacefully after paying ransom. No massacre, no burning churches, just applying Quranic principles about people of the book. Europe's response was the Third Crusade, preached as Christianity's last chance for divine forgiveness. 3 kings answered, each believing God had chosen them. Frederick Barbarossa, the most experienced commander in Europe, drowned crossing a river in Turkey. Just drowned. In 3 feet of water, the greatest warrior of his generation, gone. Medieval writers called it divine judgment for his conflicts with the Pope. Philip II of France left early, and that left Richard the Lionheart facing Saladin in what became a religious duel. Richard proved himself perhaps the greatest military tactician of the Crusades. At Arsuf, he shattered Saladin's army with a charge he claimed was inspired by St. George. He secured the entire coast. He marched within sight of Jerusalem twice, could see the holy city where Christ died. Both times, he turned back. Why would he do that? Richard, despite his religious devotion, understood practical theology. Even if he took Jerusalem, he couldn't hold it without divine miracles that weren't coming. Think of it like taking a city in Afghanistan with no supply lines and expecting God to provide food. Instead, Richard negotiated, shocking fellow Christians by treating the infidel as an equal. The Treaty of Jaffa guaranteed Christian pilgrimage to Jerusalem under Muslim control. Many saw this as apostasy. Richard had come to retake Christ's city and settled for tourist visas. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204, was diverted from its original goal of attacking Egypt due to financial problems. Unable to pay Venice for ships, the Crusaders agreed to capture Zara, a Christian city, to settle the debt. This diversion drew papal excommunication, but worse followed when the Crusaders were drawn into Byzantine politics. They besieged and captured Constantinople in 1204, looting the greatest Christian city in the East. The sack included desecration of the Hagia Sophia, mass killings, and the theft of countless relics. This shocking act deepened the rift between Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic Christianity. The Fourth Crusade achieved nothing against Islam and is remembered as one of the darkest episodes in crusading history. Now, the Fourth Crusade, this is where Christianity consumed itself. Launched in 1202 with papal blessing to attack Egypt, the Crusaders made a deal with Venice for transportation. When they couldn't pay, Venice redirected them to attack Zara, a Christian city. Pope Innocent III excommunicated the entire army, then forgave them, then excommunicated them again. The theological chaos intensified when they attacked Constantinople. In April 1204, Crusaders sacked Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the world. Let that sink in. They looted the Hagia Sophia, Christianity's grandest church, stole relics, including Christ's burial shroud, and installed a Latin patriarch. Eastern Orthodox Christians saw this as the West's great apostasy. the schism between Eastern and Western Christianity became permanent. Instead of fighting Muslims for Christ, Christians had destroyed Christ's own church. Years later came something even more theologically disturbing: the Children's Crusade of 1212. Thousands of young people, led by a boy claiming Christ appeared to him, marched toward the Mediterranean. They believed innocent faith would part the sea like God did for Moses. Spoiler alert, God didn't part anything. Many ended up sold into slavery. The movement showed how religious fervor without theological grounding could spiral into tragedy. The Fifth Crusade was designed to weaken Muslim control by striking Egypt, seen as the heart of Ayyubid power. The Crusaders, joined by forces from Hungary, Austria, and the Papal States, gathered under King John of Brienne and Cardinal Pelagius. They captured the city of Damietta in 1219, after a long and bloody siege, which seemed like a major victory. The Sultan of Egypt offered to return Jerusalem and other holy cities if the Crusaders withdrew, but Cardinal Pelagius refused. His rigid stance ignored the practical opportunity to reclaim Jerusalem peacefully. When the Crusaders marched on Cairo, the Nile's floodwaters were used against them. The Egyptians deliberately opened the dams, flooding the plains and trapping the crusading army. Surrounded and weakened by hunger and disease, the Crusaders were forced to surrender in 1221. They gave up Damietta in exchange for safe passage. The Fifth Crusade highlighted deep flaws in Crusader leadership as papal authority clashed with secular kings, and opportunities were squandered due to pride and theological obstinacy. The Sixth Crusade, 1228 to 1229, was highly unusual as it achieved its goals without significant fighting. It was led by Emperor Frederick II, who had been excommunicated for delaying his vow to crusade. Through diplomatic negotiations with Sultan Al-Kamil of Egypt, Frederick secured Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth for the Christians. In 1229, he crowned himself King of Jerusalem, despite being under excommunication. This bloodless success shocked contemporaries. How could an excommunicated ruler succeed where papally blessed crusaders had failed? The Pope, embarrassed, launched a crusade against Frederick's Italian lands, even as Frederick celebrated his triumph in the Holy Land. The Sixth Crusade showed that diplomacy could achieve what warfare often could not, but it also exposed the deep divisions between papal and imperial authority. The Seventh Crusade, 1248 to 1254, was led by King Louis IX of France, later sainted, was one of the most devout monarchs in medieval Europe. Louis targeted Egypt, believing its conquest would open the path to Jerusalem. Louis was a mystic who wore hair shirts, whipped himself, and washed lepers' feet. He believed God had chosen him to recover Jerusalem. He spent years preparing, built a port city named after himself, basically medieval religious megalomania, and brought chaplains to convert Muslims. The Crusaders captured Damietta in 1249, but their advance stalled at Mansoura, where Egyptian forces employed clever tactics and Greek fire, which Crusaders called Devil's Fire. Disease ravaged the Crusader army, and Louis was ultimately captured along with much of his force. A ransom secured his release, but the campaign was a disaster. Louis remained in the region for several years, attempting to strengthen Crusader defenses, but he never regained Jerusalem. The Seventh Crusade drained French resources and morale, and though Louis's piety earned him canonization, the crusade itself was a failure, and Jerusalem remained Muslim. The Eighth Crusade, 1270, was launched by King Louis IX of France, also known as Saint Louis, after the failure of the Seventh Crusade. Louis was motivated by a combination of religious devotion, personal vows, and the belief that God had chosen him as Christianity's champion. However, instead of heading directly to the Holy Land, Louis diverted his forces to Tunis in North Africa. Historians debate his reasoning. Some argue he sought to convert the Sultan of Tunis and establish a base closer to Egypt, while others suggest political and economic motives tied to French trade interests in the Mediterranean. The crusade quickly unraveled. The climate was brutal for the European army, supply lines were overstretched, and disease spread rapidly. Within weeks, dysentery devastated the Crusaders, and King Louis himself succumbed to the illness on August 25, 1270. His death shocked Christendom, and though the crusade accomplished nothing militarily, Louis was revered as a martyr and canonized as a saint in 1297. The Eighth Crusade demonstrated the decline of the crusading movement, logistical mismanagement, poor strategic planning, and dwindling enthusiasm among European monarchs. It also marked the effective end of large-scale papally-backed crusades to the Muslim world. The Ninth Crusade, 1271 to 1272, is often seen as the last major crusade to the Holy Land. It was led by Prince Edward of England, the future King Edward I. Arriving with only a small force, Edward attempted to shore up the remaining Crusader states. He launched raids into Muslim territory and survived an assassination attempt, which later chroniclers described as divine protection. Despite some military successes, Edward lacked the manpower to make lasting gains. By 1272, he negotiated a truce with Sultan Baybars of Egypt. Shortly after, Edward returned home, and with the fall of Acre in 1291, Crusader rule in the Holy Land effectively ended. The Ninth Crusade symbolized the waning of European enthusiasm for crusading and the shift of attention toward domestic politics and other theaters of conflict. The religious mission had failed. But wait, crusading theology wasn't finished. The Albigensian Crusade from 1209 to 1229 showed how holy war turned inward. The Cathars believed the material world was evil, challenging Catholic theology. Pope Innocent III declared them worse than Muslims. When Crusaders took Béziers, the papal legate allegedly said, "Kill them all. God will recognize his own." 20,000 fellow Christians died. The Crusade birthed the Inquisition, showing how religious war created religious persecution. In the Baltic, Teutonic knights waged crusades to forcibly convert pagans. They believed salvation came through the sword. They conquered Prussia, destroyed pagan sacred groves, and built churches on temple sites. These Northern Crusades created a warrior Christianity that merged evangelism with ethnic cleansing. Ever wonder why that part of Europe has such complex religious history? Now you know. The Reconquista in Spain became a crusade when popes granted spiritual rewards for fighting Muslims. The Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212 was preached as a struggle between cross and crescent. By 1492, when Granada fell, Spanish Christianity had developed an identity inseparable from religious war. Yes, the same year Columbus sailed for America, spreading that militant Christianity worldwide. Even after losing the Holy Land, popes preached crusades against Ottoman Turks as defending Christendom. At Nicopolis in 1396 and Varna in 1444, crusading armies were destroyed. The Ottomans took Constantinople in 1453, ending the Christian Byzantine Empire. God, it seemed, had switched sides. 9 major crusades to the Holy Land, plus countless religious wars across Europe. Millions dead, all believing they fought for God. Jerusalem changed hands multiple times but ended under Muslim control. The Crusades didn't achieve their spiritual goals, but they transformed Christianity from a religion of martyrs into a religion of warriors, creating theological divisions that echo today. If you found this educational, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more on the history of religions.